Have you ever been burned by the church? Or maybe this. Have you ever been burned or hurt or taken advantage of by a Christian? If you have, I just want to start by saying I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened. We as believers are not supposed to act this way. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was a teenager, I went on a youth group trip. We were going to Kentucky. We were going to a certain camp where we would do things like paint and make fence and pour concrete, doing all the things that would just, help the camp keep going. But on that week, there was a girl who was a little bit older than me. She wasn't a youth group regular, but she was coming to get closer to Jesus. And during that week, I had found out through the grapevine that she had slept with someone in the school. Now, I knew that sex outside of marriage was wrong because it seemed like they beat that into our head week after week after week, and this girl had done that thing. So when I heard this, I became completely self-righteous, and I walked up to her and I said, "So I have a question about your virginity." And she looked at me straight in the eyes and said, "I cannot believe that you just asked me that question." And with tears running down her face, she turned around and walked away. Now, I'll finish that story and what I learned from it, so stick with me to the end of the video so I can explain to you how completely out of line I was. In short, I was a jerk and a scumbag to that girl. That poor girl wanted to get closer to Jesus, and all I did was just bash her over the head with what I thought was the right thing to do. My name is JD Goding, and this is Understanding the Bible. And the reason that I created this channel was to take small amounts of text and simply mine the gold out of it. If you're curious about what the Bible says and some of it seems confusing, my goal in this channel is to make it not confusing so that your relationship with Jesus Christ will only deepen. And if you wouldn't mind, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps get the message out there. Now, just prior to the story I'm about to unpack, Jesus has just revealed what really makes a person either defiled or unclean, depending on the wording that you want to use. You see, in the Jewish world in the first century, what you ate and the ceremonial washings that took place before you ate were what they thought made you clean before God. And what Jesus reveals is they couldn't have been further from the truth. Jesus makes it clear that it's not what goes into your body, as in food, that makes you unclean, but it's what comes out of you that is the sinful behavior, like sexual immorality, envy, slander, or pride. Those things coming out of us are the sin that actually defiles us. So fast forward a couple days and you're going to see Jesus and the disciples come into a real life scenario where this is going to play out right in front of them. In the beginning of the story, Jesus takes the boys to a geographical location that they've never been to, and nor would they ever want to go to this place, because in the eyes of the Jews, the actual location of where they're going and the people they're about to encounter are considered unclean and defiled and disgusting, and the Jews hated these people. So this is a stretch for the disciples. And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered the house, and he did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. Now, Tyre and Sidon were two coastal cities that sat on the Mediterranean Sea that were a part of Syria in Jesus' day. Now, Tyre was about 34 miles from Capernaum, where Jesus did a lot of ministry. And then Sidon was an additional 22 miles beyond that. So this is a huge journey. This round trip for the disciples would have been about 112 miles, and all of it would have been on foot. So this is a story that you need to pay attention to, because Jesus is coming for one reason and one reason only. And the people that you want to look at in the story are A, the woman, and B, the disciples. And he is going to flip the script on the disciples to show how wrong and sinful they are, and yet elevate this foreign woman who has faith in Jesus and who also is in deep distress. Now, you got to understand how famous Jesus is at this point. Like, his miracle stories have gone viral. Everybody knows, even people outside of Israel, to the Gentiles, to the people of other nations, have actually heard about the miracles that Jesus has done. But immediately, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now, the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Jesus is literally in a different geographical location, and this woman comes up to him, throws herself down in front of him at his feet, and says, "Can you please help me?" Now, when you throw yourself down at someone's feet, that is an extreme act of humility. And this woman was a Gentile. It says that she's a Syrophoenician by birth. This means that the Jewish people would have hated her. Like, she was the enemy. And so for the disciples to look at this, the disciples in their heart of hearts, they're thinking she's the enemy as well. But yet Jesus is coming to interact with this woman. See, Jesus is breaking the minds of the disciples, and it's just awesome to watch. Now, the Gospel of Matthew adds just a couple more details to the story that help us really see the bigger picture that Jesus was after. In Matthew 15:22, it says, "And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon.'" So this woman comes out crying, basically saying, "Help me." And she says, "O Lord and Son of David." How does this Gentile woman know who Jesus actually is? How does she know this? Because this is a statement of faith. And the answer is, we really don't know, but yet she actually believes in who Jesus is. And she is in a world of hurt and needs his help. But he did not answer her a word, and his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she's crying out after us." Don't you think it's kind of strange that the first thing Jesus does is not say a word? Remember, Jesus had just given his disciples the class on what actually makes a person sinful. It's not the food that goes in, but it's the attitude or the action that comes out of a person that reveals their sinfulness. And what's coming out of the disciples' mouths? It's pride, it's prejudice, and it's racism. They want nothing to do with this woman who is doing everything she can in order to get to Jesus. In this story, the disciples are acting in the same way as I did when I went to Kentucky and I mouthed off to that poor girl who is just trying to get closer to Jesus. Yeah, I'm the disciples in this story. Now, there is a goldmine of information here because the disciples just want her gone. She's crying out, making a scene, and begging for Jesus, and the disciples just want her to leave and go away. The disciples are frustrated because, in their words, she's crying out after, quote, us. What? No, she's crying out after the Lord and the Son of David, meaning she is crying out to Jesus as the Messiah. She needs his help. You see, there's a huge contrast going on here. The disciples are seemingly lost. They're in a foreign land, they're around foreign people, and they do not want to be there. They just want to leave. But Jesus isn't concerned about the effort that it took to get there, all those miles traveled. In fact, when you read the Gospels, there isn't anything else that Jesus does in this area, which tells you the whole reason that Jesus walked into this is for this woman alone. He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." Now, the answer that Jesus gives makes it seem like he's talking about the people who are Jewish by birth. And he is, in a way. But the real question you have to ask here is, what does the lost sheep of Israel mean? Now, there are two answers to this, and the first one is actually kind of surprising, because the first lost sheep of Israel that he comes into contact with is this woman. But you see, she's a Gentile woman. How could she be a lost sheep of Israel? Because she has had faith in Jesus. She has called him Lord, and she has called him Son of David, meaning, Jesus, you are the Messiah. You are who you say you are. This woman did not have a drop of Jewish blood in her bloodstream, but yet she was a lost sheep of Israel. Her past, her background, the place that she grew up, her last name, none of that matters to Jesus because of where she put her faith. So this lost sheep has been found. The second group of lost sheep here is actually the disciples. They've heard Jesus teach. They've seen him do miracles. They've seen him raise people from the dead. They've witnessed all of these things that he's done, but they do not understand what Jesus has just taught them. It's not what goes into a person that makes them unclean. It's what comes out of a person. And what's coming out of them at this point? Racism, hatred, and pride. They don't fully understand who Jesus is because it's evident that they've just failed the test that Jesus has given them. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Now, of all the things that he could say in that moment, it's like, Jesus, this is the harshest thing you could ever say, especially when you just read this through once. But let me unpack this because this is a really encouraging statement. There's a couple things to consider here. And the first thing is, when you think of a dog, what are you thinking of? Now, a Jewish person would call a Gentile a dog because it was a derogatory term. And the kind of dog in that context would be the one that travels in packs. If you've ever been to a foreign country where packs of dogs, of wild dogs, travel, it's scary because they are very dangerous. But there's also another type of dog, and that's the family pet. The one that eats the food that's literally dropped off the table by the kids. And the type of dog that Jesus is referring to here is that family pet. So think small, think fluffy, think harmless, and remember, Fido is always there to clean up the mess. The second thing to notice is that Jesus is most likely using a local proverb that everybody in that day would have understood, because her reply is this: "But she answered him, 'Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs.'" There are certain proverbs in our culture that we use all the time in order to get a meaning across. Think about this. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. But what's the rebuttal? But it's never too late to learn. Or how about this? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. What's the rebuttal to that? Unless you put salt in the oats. And there are dozens of examples that I could use from our culture, and it was the same back then. This woman is making the case that she's not asking for much. She's not even asking for a meal. She's literally asking for a crumb that's fallen off the table that would be fed to the dog. And she is considering herself as the dog, and the miracle that she's asking for is that Jesus would take the demon out of her daughter. This woman's faith, humility, and boldness is something that we should marvel at and emulate. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from this woman. And he said to her, "For this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in a bed and the demon gone. Jesus honors this woman's faith by granting her request. This would have again shown the disciples that people who have faith, whether they're Jew or Gentile, male or female, if they're rich or poor, it doesn't matter what your background is. If the person has faith in Jesus Christ, that is the criteria that Jesus is after, and he loves that. So there I was standing as she's walking away, feeling like a pile of trash and feeling very confused, because I had been told for so long that sex outside of marriage was wrong. And as soon as I had come into contact with someone who had done it, it's like I felt like I needed to thump her over the head with a Bible. But the problem was I didn't see the bigger picture. What I didn't understand was that this girl had gotten on the bus with us and become part of our crew, and she traveled from Illinois all the way to Kentucky with us for the purpose of having an encounter with Jesus. And all I did was bring a whole pile of hurt on top of her by gossiping and then slandering her in front of people. The interesting thing about this story is later in the week, she actually came up to me and she apologized to me for walking away and crying, which in turn made me apologize for what I had done. And we actually made up and became friends. She actually was the one that initiated the reconciliation of that problem. Like, it took a lot of guts to do that. And through that process, she actually forgave me. And the truth is, I learned more about God through that action at that camp than I did anywhere else in the week. So if you've been hurt by a Christian or by the church in ways that are completely wrong, I have a message for you from this story. While the disciples were complaining and judging this woman, Jesus wasn't. Jesus actually traveled a great distance just to meet with her so that he could see her faith and then heal her problem. The cool thing is Jesus treats you and me the same way. He never looks at us with condemnation in his eyes, because he went to the cross and he took the wrath of God on himself so that we could be free. The reason for that is because Jesus Christ has paid the price for our sin. That means we can never out-sin his grace. Then when we model that kind of grace to other people, that's really attractive to a dying world. Believe me, after 20 years of being in missions, I have seen Christians swing the hardest hammers, but the truth is Jesus never does. Now, I don't want to leave you high and dry, so here's something for you. Find a Bible and turn to the second book in the New Testament. It's the Gospel of Mark. It's only 16 chapters. It'll take you less than an hour to read. And if you do that, you're going to learn more about the amazing grace of Jesus Christ, and he's going to speak to you. Thanks, and I hope this helps.